later. All right. Okay, so first couple of things business related wise, make sure if you haven't to get the group evaluation done. I think the majority of the class has, but there's some holdouts. You have until the end of the day tomorrow to get those in before there'll be a negative consequence to your grade. So please get those wrapped up, get those done. I appreciate those of you that have done it. I have kind of a great sense of what's going on with the groups, but I want to get your perspective on it as well. So please make sure to do that if you haven't. Remember, as you're doing it, you're going to evaluate each group member separately. So please make sure to get that done by the end of the day tomorrow. Otherwise, I can start grading these and then there'll be loss of points for you, which I don't want you guys to do. The next piece is that please take a moment to complete SEIs for this class and your other classes. I, as well as many other faculty, very carefully look at those. I see what went well and make sure that continues going forward. I also take note of where there's systematic problems, and when I make adjustments, I want this to be a great class for you guys. I also want you guys to realize too is that those evaluations, some of those questions are then posted online, and it helps students decide what classes they want to take and kind of the expectations that they have for the instructor. So please take some time to do that. The biggest issue we run into, and if you've had class with me, I've talked about this before, is that I only get a response from 1 or 2, 3, 4 people, 5 maybe, out of a class of 40, and I don't know if they're representative of the whole class or not. And as you guys know from data, if we have a limited number of participants, it's very hard to draw any conclusions. So please take some time to do that. I super appreciate it. What I'm going to do is, again, go through, talk about the final paper, answer any questions you guys have. I'll then ask you guys if you have any kind of general class questions. At that point, what we'll do for the remainder of the time is that I will be in the Zoom meeting during our class time from this time all the way through next Thursday. Okay, so I'll be here for the remainder of today, Thursday as a last kind of normal class, and during finals week. During that time, I'm just happy to be here to answer any questions that you have, go through things. Basically, I was just going to leave it open so you could just jump right in. So in case someone else is having a similar issue, you can hear their response. If that gets to be problematic, I might set up a waiting room situation. If it needs to be kind of more one-on-one, I'll let you guys know as we progress through that. But my hope is that you guys would be okay with just kind of letting others jump in as we're talking about things, working through questions, because someone else may have a similar question as you. So that's the idea. I'm here to support you guys all the way through the end. So please don't take, not having formal classes to the end here as sending you guys out to the wolves. If we were in class, we would all just be meeting there. Because we're not, I want to you guys have the flexibility of it. So definitely happy to help you with that. So that's kind of the plan going forward. After I get done talking about the paper, I'll put you guys back into your groups. So you can kind of check in, make sure everyone's set. Then from there, you can just check in with me before you leave, or you can stay on today and just start working on things and be around others as they're working on it. So let me go ahead and get into the final paper. I'll share the screen and we'll walk through this. Again, this is the opportunity to ask any questions you guys have, get clarification. Just to confirm, you guys can see the paper on the screen, correct? Okay, just want to double check, okay? So basically, the overarching idea behind the last paper is that we're going to pull together everything from the class. Remember, the class had 2 components to it: the summaries and discussions that we feel like we did millions and millions of years ago at this point, and then the research that you guys have been working on that we're just finishing up now. And what we're going to do is we're going to pull this all together so that the work that you put in both of those sections will start to pay off in this final paper. That's why we see it being the majority of the points in this class. It's about 1/3 of the points in this class. It was a little bit less than that originally because we had to drop some assignments. It's now picked up a little more value. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through each of the sections, kind of discuss what I'm looking at, give you kind of some informal hints and things like that. As you work on this, I'm happy to provide any more information to clarify points, what I might be looking for, anything like that. So please realize that this is not just a one-time discussion about this, but I'm happy to provide more information as we go along. So you'll see that the biggest chunk of points in the paper is the introduction. And that's because you're going to be covering the most amount of information. And this is where you're going to start really setting up your paper. The introduction is really critical to do a nice job with because it sets up the research you're doing, it sets up why you're doing it, and it demonstrates your thought process. So basically, I can now get into your head and understand why you did everything. So the first part of this is describing the overall research questions and goals for the research you conducted. So why is this study occurring? Why is it interesting to the reader? So the idea here is that you're going to establish to me as the reader, what research question are you interested in investigating? Okay, so where are we headed with things? And as part of that too, you want to get the reader interested and hooked into your topic. Okay, so give me basic definitions. boring generic statements, things like that, aren't really going to draw the reader in. If you read some of the papers, and I encourage you guys to do this, that did a nice job, they start off with something kind of interesting, explaining why this is an important piece to be looking at, why it's an interesting question, why they're looking at it, why they're looking at this specific question. You want to establish kind of the importance of the paper right away. From there, we're going to break it down into specific things that you're looking for. Okay, so I'll say that that first section should just be about a paragraph, maybe two. The next section is you provide basic information about ostracism, social exclusion. Okay, so provide information to orient your reader to what they need to know and the importance of social exclusion, ostracism. And you can take this any direction that you want, but basically, if you're new to ostracism, social exclusion, what would you want someone to know? Okay, so it's just kind of the broad overall scope of things. You might talk about KIPP's basic needs model. You might talk about why we ostracize others. We might talk about just kind of interesting findings related to ostracism and why it happens. Providing, in this case, just kind of the basic background information. And this is where we can go back to all those articles that you read at the beginning of the semester. You can share with each other the articles that you reviewed for that first assignment, paper assignment. You know, there's some research in there that you can share. So providing just kind of a background for me. Okay, so basically kind of getting me up to speed, starting from the very beginning. This should be about a paragraph or two. I can't be specific with these kind of things. Some people will be able to knock it out in a very concise fashion in a paragraph. Some might need a little more space in terms of having 2 paragraphs to get this done. I'm fine either way, so long as you're doing a good job explaining things. The next thing that you'll do in your introduction is provide research information related to your first dependent variable. So what research is related to that first dependent variable that you're looking for? In this case, that'll be the variable that we're pulling from the ostracism literature. So remember, we had one variable that was closely related to ostracism. The second was something that was kind of new and different. So this first paragraph is talking about things that you've measured that have been looked at in ostracism before. So talk about the basic needs, talk about negative affect, talk about what they are, research related to it. Give me kind of the clear information related to that. You're then going to go into the next section, which is where you're going to talk about your second dependent variable. And you'll see that this section carries a little bit more weight because it's something new. And so in the second dependent variable section, you again provide the research that's important for understanding information about that variable, that novel new variable that you looked at, and then linking it to ostracism. So why look at this? Okay, why does it make sense that ostracism would affect this dependent variable? Okay, so, you know, in my case, I was looking at dehumanization. So what I want to do is review literature about dehumanization and why it would make sense that it's related to understanding what happens when someone leaves the group. Okay, making the argument in my case that when someone leaves the group, you might feel dehumanized because they don't value you. You'll then conclude your introduction by stating your hypotheses correctly. So this is where, again, we spent so much time talking about hypotheses, comparing the groups in previous steps, because that helps you then write your hypotheses. Within most of the sections, there's a little bit of formatting aspects too. So you'll see in the introduction, I'm going to evaluate you on making sure your research review flows and guides your reader through your thinking. Okay, so you want to explain to me as you're transitioning between different studies, different ideas, between paragraphs, what's going on. Okay, so take me through your thinking so that I understand your thought process. If it just becomes, here's one piece of research after another, and I don't see how they're linked, you're not doing the strongest job that you can in the introduction. I also want you to incorporate a number of article citations to support the points that you're making. So students always want to say, well, how many references do I need to have? I can't answer that for you guys. In some cases, there's a lot of literature to talk about. Some cases, there's less literature to talk about, so you don't have as many citations. In some cases, you might have a support a point where there's a lot of research that supports that point. We have multiple citations for it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look at what you're writing and say, well, hey, do you have the appropriate amount of citations? Is it basically you're bringing in lots of articles that are relevant, or is it you kind of just writing your own thoughts with no support behind it? Okay, we don't want to do that latter piece where we're kind of writing a lot without a lot of support behind it. When you sit down to do any of these sections, especially the introduction, go back to one or two of the papers that you really liked, read through their introduction to see how they laid it out, how they talked about things, and mimic that kind of writing, their structure of it, the way that they walked you through the thinking, how they wrote their hypotheses out. You guys read a lot of articles at the beginning. That's exactly why we did that, so that you can see how introductions are set up, see the thought process behind it. So that's the first chunk of points in terms of the introduction being 75 points. I'm going to pause here to see what questions you guys have. Again, I'm happy to answer questions later on, but things that kind of come to you immediately. Okay, or any points that you want me to go back through and review a little more carefully. Okay, so give me a thumbs up if we're good for moving forward. Thumbs up, thumbs up. Okay. All right, so let's continue on. Again, we can come back to a previous section if we need to. So the next section you're going to talk about is your method section. If I'm you, what I would do is I'd write the paper we call inside out. I'd write the methods and results first, then the introduction and discussion. The reason why I do this is that methods has a pretty good formula to it. So to help you kind of get going with your writing, and it provides a structure for you. The other thing too is make sure you kind of have a good handle on things to then be able to think about what theories you want to talk about. So in the method, you're going to describe the participants by providing the basic information. So at the end of your output, I have your demographics for you. So talking about age, gender, and race of your participants, you'll talk about that. Okay, you also want to note how many participants were in your study. This is the perfect example to look at how people wrote up their participant section in their articles and mimic that behavior. Don't use the same words. Okay, so don't plagiarize, but use that same kind of approach. In this case, you're going to explicitly state your independent, dependent variables to make sure that you're clear on what they are. Explain those to me. You're then going to explain the manipulation participants completed. So what did participants complete, and what did you manipulate between the conditions? Okay, if they're playing a cyberball game, talk about, or imagining playing a cyberball game, I should say, discuss what changed between each of those conditions. Okay, make it super clear what changed and why it changed. You'll then, in points 4 and 5 here, get into talking about what the manipulation checks were. So what did you do to assess if participants understood the manipulation? And you'll then describe the dependent variables. So give example items for each scale. So you don't have to give all the items, but a few examples. And provide the scale that participants used. Keep in mind some things as you do this. One is that in terms of this formatting, I want you to describe the methods from the participant's perspective. Okay, so this is the first mistake that I made that I really remember writing as an undergrad is I didn't do this. Walk me through step by step what participants did. Okay, from the very beginning to the experiment to the very end. Participants began by providing consent. After they provided consent to participate, they then mentally visualized a cyberball game. They were specifically given these instructions. As you walk through what the participants did, then you'll talk about the manipulation as you get to it. After the manipulation, then talk about the measures that participants went through. Okay, so just walk me through it. You're basically telling me a story of what participants did. As part of this too, with this methods formatting down here at the bottom, make sure you provide sufficient detail so that I could replicate this study. Okay, so you don't have to tell me every detail, but enough that I can understand what you did. This again is another one. If I'm writing the methods section, and in fact, guys, I always do this, I go and I find a paper that is similar to how I did it, or did a good job writing the methods, and then I replicate that. Okay, I use that same kind of approach. Sometimes I look at my own papers to remember how I wrote something up to kind of get in that mind frame. So questions about our methods section. And again, I suggest kind of starting here. I think it's one of the easiest places to start with writing a paper. Okay, so anything that comes to mind, points that you want me to review a little bit more. Okay, thumbs up. All right. So let's go to the results. Okay, the results are something that you guys, you can use the examples that we talked about in class that I provided in terms of going through that video, my example that I gave you in terms of output and then the writing. So with this, again, describe the manipulation checks for at least one of your manipulation checks. So if many of you had multiple, you can pick one if you only want to do one. You describe the results of your first independent variable, your second dependent variable, with talking about your dependent variables, indicate if they supported your hypotheses or not, so indicate where they didn't. The key thing here is the formatting. So the results, especially when comparing groups, I should say, are easy to follow. So can I see the different comparisons you're making? Are you being systematic that you're doing that? And do the results include the appropriate statistics to support the written claim? Basically, are you pulling the right statistics from that output? Okay, so this should be straightforward in terms of you have lots of resources, examples of this, but I'm very happy to help you guys as you work with this because I know writing results is different for you, something else you haven't done. But again, the methods and results has a nice structure to it. That's where I would start off with writing. Okay, that's where I always start writing. Working on theses with students, we always start with their methods as we do proposals and things like that. So questions about the results. I think we've kind of worked with this a little bit before, but happy to answer questions. Okay, thumbs up, we're good? All right. So let's dig into the discussion, and we'll talk about kind of the last pieces around out. So I'll tell you what, the discussion section is probably one of the tougher ones to do. So keep that in mind in terms of both if you're getting a little frustrated while you're doing it, but also make sure that you set aside time to work on this. It can be kind of the piece that gets rushed through at the end. So the first thing you're going to do is summarize your results in simple language. Okay, so what did your study find? Do the results support your hypothesis? Again, if you look at any good paper, that discussion section, the very first paragraph, just summarizes what happened in that study. And that's, again, where I told you guys, you're trying to understand results from a paper, look there first. Okay. What I want you to do is imagine if your results were publishable, what contributions to the literature would you make? Okay, so how are you expanding on previous findings? How is this something new? Okay. Is it in line with previous findings? Is it opposite of what previous findings found? Okay, so that can happen. Okay. So situate yourself within that larger research. Questions 3 and 4, I'm really expecting good critical thinking. So what are some limitations to your research? You guys have lots of limitations to talk about just because of the format that we had to do this study in. Okay, so, paper and pencil, recalling or imagining experience versus actually doing it, limits for the measures that you took, limits to maybe the participants you had, things like that. Talk about those limitations. Okay? Same thing with future directions. What are some future studies that you could do based on your research? So what are other moderators? What are other factors you could introduce? And as you're doing this, thinking about worthwhile studies. So we can always just add one more factor to a study, but think about and explain why that's a worthwhile factor to look at. Okay, so, I might say, well, hey, what we could do is we could look to see if the person leaving the group is an in-group or out-group member. Okay. I can explain why that matters. Maybe we like it better when an out-group member leaves because now it means there's more in-group members. Maybe that's more comfortable. Okay, so explain why that's a worthwhile future research study to do, not just rattling off, potential studies. Explain why it helps you learn something new. Okay. So questions about the discussion. Okay, you guys make me nervous with not having questions, but I know you're first kind of seeing it, going through it now. All right, let's take care of some of the mechanic pieces, and then I'll kind of pause, see if there's any questions, kind of thinking about things. So the reference section is worth 20 points. The references should be provided appropriately for each article, meaning that as you talk about information, you're supporting it with an article. The citations in the text should be formatted correctly. You guys can use the articles that we've been reading as examples. If you go to Purdue's OWL website, they have the APA formatting examples there. There's all kinds of ways for you guys to just kind of look this up in terms of seeing how to do the citations in the text correctly. The references in the reference section should also be in APA format. When you guys did your summaries, especially at the beginning, I gave you feedback on your citations, your APA format. So you should be able to use those as examples in terms of how to write those correctly. Okay, so I do expect you guys to spend some time to carefully put the references together. This is the kind of thing that even if you're tired but still want to make progress on the paper, you work on the reference section. You'll see that going down to the writing section, this is also a big piece of the paper. It has kind of equal weight to several of the different sections. So what I'm looking for in terms of the writing is writing technicality. So are you using punctuation and grammar correctly? Okay, so just kind of the basics of good writing. I'm looking at the style. So is it easy to follow? Is your writing interesting and engaging? Is it formal in terms of your writing, for a research audience? Same thing with sentence structure. Are the sentences clear, easy to understand? Are the clauses in the sentences lining up? Are you writing sentences that are complex? So I'm not reading, short, choppy sentences with sentences, but you're putting your thoughts together. Paragraph structure and transition is a really big piece of writing well. The idea here is, are you bringing me through your thinking? Are you relating one concept to another? Are you relating it back to your research question? Are you guiding me through your thinking? Okay. And the last piece here is organization of the paper. So is it clear what each of the sections are that you're discussing? Okay. You can use headers and subheaders to organize. So if you look at any of the papers that we've written, if you look at mine especially, I always put lots of headers in because it allows the reader to know what specific topic we're focused on. Okay, that becomes especially important in the methods and results section to have those headers. I'll give you the basic punchline summary of the whole thing. There's two pieces here. One is, if you want to know how you're doing, look at this rubric and think about those pieces. And if you feel like you've done it well, then you're in good shape. But if you're reading through and you're thinking, hey, this sentence isn't quite right, I didn't explain these results clearly, it means you need to make adjustments there. So you can grade this. You can exchange papers with your group members. You do have to individually do your own work and present your own work, but you can get feedback from group members. You can have them grade it for you, help you know where you're kind of weak if you're get this done ahead of time. Okay. The second piece of this, and this may sound a bit weird, is that you don't want to make me think. Okay, so this is always a weird thing to say. The idea here being that if I have to put together the thoughts that you're trying to make, if I have to understand how things are flowing together, if I have to interpret all the different comparisons and sit there and slow down and think about it, it means you're bogging me down as a reader, and that makes it much harder to appreciate all the great stuff that you've done. Okay, the papers that I love the most are ones where I get done reading it and I feel, damn, I'm really smart because it's really easy to follow the researcher's thinking. Okay, so that's really your goal. I tell this with all writing classes, with all good writers. The less you have to make someone think, the more they can just stay focused on appreciating the work, and the better it is. I'm currently reviewing a paper where I think it's really interesting, but I can't understand a damn thing that's going on in their results. Okay, it is all over the place. It's not consistent. They're not focused on their hypotheses. It is super hard to read, and it's totally diminishing a paper that could be really successful, but I can't understand it. That's literally what I'm writing back. Okay, so that's why you want to make it simple and straightforward. The keys to the success with this paper is not waiting till the last minute. Do not write it the night before. Do not plan on writing it the night before. You want to spread out your writing. It's going to make it much more effective. You're going to be less likely to get overwhelmed. It also will help you with getting feedback from both your classmates and myself. In terms of feedback from me, this will be the last piece I'll share before asking questions again. If you send me your whole paper, I'll give you general feedback. If there's a specific question, I'll give you specific feedback. This is mostly through email. If you want me to review your whole paper and you want specific feedback, at that point we have to set up a Zoom meeting. The reason why is that if I give you lots of feedback on the whole thing, it's more likely to confuse you. If we talk about it through Zoom, I think it's clear and I can make sure that you understand things well. And with that being said, I'm here to support you guys all the way through to the end to do a great job with this. So please, use me as a resource, work with each other a bit too, since you have similar projects to kind of think things through as well. I just ask that you put kind of good, honest effort into it before you connect with me, because then you'll have processed it well. Okay. So with all that being said, lots of information. Again, it's recorded if you need to go back through things. Questions that I can answer for you, concerns, anything along those lines.
Oh, you can go ahead.
Okay. I had a question. So I know we're going to be citing a lot of articles and stuff in the introduction, but should we be citing things throughout the whole article or paper, or like throughout any of the other sections?
Okay, so great question. Okay, so I'll answer it with two parts. One is that kind of question is a great question to ask. It's also one that's a good one. If you look at papers, you'll see that they cite it all the way through, right? So I say that just because I don't want you guys to forget that we've done all this reading, we've read all these papers, you guys know how to break these things down. Use those as examples. So they do cite all the way through. The reason why they cite all the way through is that things like your methods, right? You want to cite, well, where did you get the study from? Okay, I'm sorry, where did you get that measure from? So that's why I had you guys, when you're pulling up measures, find the citation for it. Okay, or why I provided one with just something like the basic needs or negative affect. You want to say basically, even in that section, that, hey, here's the research that supports why I use this measure. So outside of the statistics section, which there won't be any citations for you guys, the introduction, method, and discussion should all have citations. Okay. So as you're situating your research within larger research, you should talk about other articles. As you're talking about future directions, you might say, so-and-so did this article, so-and-so did this type of research, we can add our element to it to make a new study. So yes, you should have citations all the way through it, with the exception in your case of the results. There won't be any citations needed there. Okay. But great question. I love that you asked that. It's a good point of clarification.
Thank you.
All right, I know that there was another one out there too.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, is there a specific page requirement, or is it kind of the same approach with the introduction where it depends?
Yeah, there's absolutely no page requirements. There's no reference requirements. I can say that shorter and less article references usually leads towards bigger issues of the paper not being as strong. But it's a matter of how concise you are. It's a matter of how much literature there is. Again, I would write a first draft. I would grade it. You could put your Dr. Worth hat on and go through, would he say that, the flow is good? Would he say I have enough information about autism? and evaluate those pieces and kind of keep working on each of those pieces as you're going along. So guys, this is not like other papers where you guys saying you have an 11-page paper that's due tomorrow and you have this huge basic down to the nitty-gritty details of how it's done. It's not that paper. This is a process that you have to work yourself through. You want to write it over time. Some of these things will be easy to write, some of them are not. Guys, I've written 8,000 word papers and I've then turned around and cut them down into 4,000 word papers. It all just kind of depends on how you put things together. So Ross, that's a great question to ask, but there's no set specifics.
Thank you.
So clear as mud. I apologize, but this is upper level class, so things change in that regard. Great questions, great thoughts. Other questions, concerns, things that I can address that you guys can think of at this point?
Is there going to be specific references that you want us to make, like things that we've given to you in the past or past papers that we've used? Or is it just whatever we can find that'll be able to support what we're writing?
Yeah, so great question as well. So use those articles that we read originally. You have citations from step 2 and step 1 where you're developing your research idea. I expect to see those citations come back, especially for your methods. You guys have read enough ostracism literature now to know some of the classic citations that are worthwhile including. Talking about Cyroball, that always comes up, the social pain kind of things. But in terms of things other than that, the only other piece I would add is making sure that you're pulling from reputable journals. So keeping high criteria for journals. We talked about true social psychology journals, steering towards those, staying away from books and dissertations, which you're not able to read and process, get access to. That's really the only other piece. So again, a good question. I'll leave it to your discretion as to what needs to be in there because you guys have read enough to know, but there's nothing I would say has to show up. Unless my name is on it, in which case you need to cite me like crazy. I'm kidding. You don't have to. Okay. Elizabeth.
If we want to have you review our chunks of our paper or our whole paper, is there a certain date that we should get it to you by?
Yeah, so another great question. So basically, again, it works. The whole paper will give you general feedback, specific questions, specific feedback, whole paper with specific feedback we meet. There's no specific deadline. I will help you guys out to the end. But I will say that the closer you get to the end, the more everyone else is going to want help, and that the feedback is going to get faster and less helpful. Just for the fact that I want to get to everyone, I want to help everyone, and that you have to kind of keep that in mind. So that's all I really can say is I will keep trying to get feedback. It might be the feedback gets a little bit shorter because there's multiple people lined up. You may have to do a little more careful reading of what I'm saying, not how I'm saying it. So realize you may get more kind of critical feedback to help you improve things, unless more positive feedback, just because I want to get that feedback to you. So I don't have a set date by it, but realize I do sleep, I do eat, I do have other classes, stuff like that. So dropping it off at midnight on Thursday night, wanting feedback in time to turn it in on Friday morning is going to leave you severely disappointed. Okay. So again, another vague kind of answer for you guys. I'd say, Tuesday, Wednesday is a lot easier, more likely to give chance for you to give you feedback. You start to get into Thursday, it's going to get harder unless you have kind of specific easy questions. Again, clear as mud. I apologize, guys. Welcome to kind of the research approach to things, but I think you guys can handle it well. Awesome questions, important questions, others you guys can think of. Anything else? All right, so let me turn off the recording and we'll take care of kind of our last steps here.